5-year-old Kurosaki Ichigo watched on, not sure what to feel, as his arch-nemesis and enemy of the world, Aizen Susuke, tried in vain to fight off the sealing Kido that Urahara Kisuke implanted within him. As the nails of red Kido took effect, Ichigo, though back to how this happened, flashback. Ichigo and Aizen, minutes prior, were having a titanic showdown on the outskirts of Karakura town. The force of their blows and the intensity of their ryatsu literally rewrote the landscape. It was as if two gods descended from the heavens and were clashing over their ideals. It wasn't too far from the truth. With the Hogyoku continuously granting Aizen power by evolving his very being to unimaginable levels, along with Ichigo reaching the peak of power that any Shinigami could possibly hope to achieve, these two behemoths were in a league of their own. It was incomprehensible to Aizen that Kurosaki Ichigo could reach this level in such a short period of time. Despite the numerous chances that Aizen had to end the life of his current adversary, he never once did, viewing the teen as an amusing sideshow for him to enjoy. He was well aware of the heritage that the boy carried, and his scientific curiosity got the better of him as he wished to see what would happen if he was to be pushed to the brink. He never expected the result to manifest in such a manner. For the entirety of the battle thus far, Kurosaki Ichigo controlled the flow and didn't even seem to be breaking a sweat as he manhandled Aizen, who achieved an unprecedented level of transcendence thanks to the Hogyoku. Which was baffling, as just a few hours prior, the substitute Shinigami could barely even stand in his presence without shaking in fear. For the first time in a long time, Aizen felt a sliver of fear race down his spine. It only lasted a second before it was ruthlessly crushed beneath his assurance he had in the artifact implanted within him. A traitorous thought echoed in his mind, though, one questioning whether he should have dealt with the boy when he had the chance. Ichigo, for his part, marveled at the sensations he felt. It wasn't so much the mind-numbingly incomprehensible levels of power that he felt thrum beneath his skin as it was the feeling of tranquility. Ever since that fateful day that Kichiki Rukia transferred her powers to him, he always had this sense of discomfort. At first he chalked it up to it not being his own powers that caused him to feel uncomfortable. He never brought it up with anyone, not that he had anyone besides Rukia to ask. When he went through the shattered shaft training and regained his powers, the feeling of awkwardness persisted. It wasn't so much as discomfort as it was a feeling of something lacking. At the time he didn't have much time to ponder about it, as he had to rescue Rukia. After he completed his task, he chalked up the strange feeling to the fact that he somehow had a hollow inside of him. He tried to ruthlessly suppress it, but it persisted. He figured that he couldn't simply let it go, so he learned to live with the feeling of inadequacy. But now, for the first time in his life, he felt a strange feeling of completeness. His Riryoku, normally so chaotic and frenzied, felt calm and in his complete control. His power felt like an extension of him, as easy to manipulate as an arm or leg. The feeling was absolutely euphoric to him. Ichigo went on to activate his final Getsuga Tensho and split Aizen in half. Although, to his horror, it seemed that the power of the Hogyoku was able to withstand even an attack of that magnitude. Aizen started to regenerate right in front of his eyes, while Ichigo's final form began to recede. As Aizen stood in triumph over Ichigo, his body became inundated with red nails of Kido, which was explained as a sealing Kido by the arriving Urahara Kisuke. Flashback end. Which brings us to the present situation. Aizen tried his best to fight off the Kido, but it was too much for him. Ichigo watched him dispassionately, thinking how convenient it was that it was his ultimate attack that weakened Aizen enough for Kisuke's Kido to activate. He wondered if that was part of the shopkeeper's plan. He didn't have time to dwell on it though, as he could feel his power slowly leaving him. It was a bittersweet moment for him. He will never regret what he did. He was a protector by nature. If it meant that his friends and family could be safe, he would make this sacrifice 100 times over. That didn't mean that it was something he enjoyed. After finally feeling what it was like to wield his power unimpeded, it felt like a hollow victory for him. As he felt his consciousness slip away, he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like if he could have felt that way earlier. If he could have complete control of his powers. It was a selfish desire to have, but he wanted to feel the harmonious feeling of his Ryatsu once again. It made him feel complete. He wished he didn't have to lose his powers now that he finally had some level of understanding of himself. There was still so many questions left to answer. His father is a Shinigami, a former captain. If the tattered haori he was wearing was anything to go by, why didn't he say anything earlier? What more was being kept from him? There was so many unanswered questions, so many mysteries that he failed to solve. So much about himself that everyone else seemed to know about, but nobody bothered to explain to him. He was always kept in the dark, given enough information for him to get by, but not enough for him to understand his place in the world. He wanted to know more. He wanted the truth. He wanted to understand himself. As his world turned to darkness, Ichigo didn't know that there was something nearby that heard his desire. The struggling Aizen and the stoic Kisuke never noticed the slight glow that came from the chest of Aizen. The Hogyoku, in its final act before allowing itself to be sealed away, granted the deepest desire of the one it has come to acknowledge as its true master after the supreme power and unbending determination that he displayed. It granted the deepest desires of Kurosaki Ichigo, a lonely and lost soul who made the ultimate sacrifice for the world, along with another rejected soul that was in the vicinity. It was the final act it performed as it sealed itself away for good, leaving the fate of the world in the capable hands of its chosen warrior. Scene change, darkness. That was all that could be perceived as Kurosaki Ichigo floated aimlessly in whatever strange place he found himself in. The weightless feeling along with his melancholy mood made it so that he didn't care much about what was happening. He was still reeling from the loss of his power. He fell into an all too familiar trap that people in similar situations fall into, reminiscing on what he could have done differently. He wondered if he trained harder, if he put more focus into his control, if he had done more research and gathered more information about his enemies before stubbornly rushing in, if made a greater effort to understand himself. There were so many what-ifs that he considered, so many lost opportunities. It should have been a good thing. He always did want to be more normal ever since he discovered his ability to see ghosts. This would give him what he wanted, but now he realized he could never be normal. He was meant for greater things. But that was all going away now. He wondered if his mother would be proud of him right now. A sting of agony and guilt flooded his being at the thought of his beautiful mother. So warm and compassionate. She was the center of his universe until she was cruelly ripped away. If only he knew then what he knows now, maybe he could have prevented her death. He wouldn't have been so brash and unknowingly rushed into such a dangerous situation. Maybe she would still be with them. As he lamented his failures, the world around him started to twist through a kaleidoscope of colors as it restructured itself. Gleaming skyscrapers shot out of the ground as they raced up to the now clear night sky above him. It was dark, but strangely comforting. There was no moon in the sky, only a splattering of bright stars that illuminated the magnificent city. The air around him became more crisp and clean. There was a park that took formation in the middle of the city, along with a sparkling blue river running through it. At the edge of the marvelous city, tall green trees could be seen as the perfect blend of urban innovation and the serenity of nature infused itself into his surroundings. Ichigo got to his feet in shock as he looked around. This looked alarmingly like his inner world. The huge skyscrapers were intimately familiar to him. The greenery, though, that was new. He didn't know what was happening. He should have lost his powers. All of this should have gone away. A faint hope began to bloom in his chest. "Asen!" he called out, hoping to get some response from his Zanpakuto. His voice just echoed off the buildings as the vast emptiness of the area became apparent. "Hollow!" he tried, resorting to even calling for the hollow that had made his life so difficult in the past few months. He still didn't get a response. He was starting to get nervous. He had no idea what was happening. He wanted answers, but there didn't seem to be anyone around to provide them. As he was starting to panic, he heard a faint strumming noise. He strained his ears to pick up the sound and was rewarded with a gentle, heavenly melody that reverberated throughout the entire silent city. The melody was calming and soothed all of his fears and anxieties. It was calling out to him, almost as if he was in a trance. He walked towards the source of the sound. After many twists and turns, at which point the melody became louder and clearer as he went on, Ichigo finally came to a stop in front of the place that seemed to be the source of the beautiful tune. It was an anomaly in this world populated by towering skyscrapers. It was a quaint Japanese-styled house. It was medium-sized and quite beautifully maintained. Ichigo found it quite warm, like he was home. Without even thinking, he walked through the gates, crossed the front lawn and entered the house. There were tatami on the floor and sumie, Japanese ink art, lined on the walls. All in all, it suited the archetype of the traditional Japanese home. The melody seemed to be coming from the backyard, so Ichigo made his way towards the sliding door and stepped out. He was met with more beautiful scenery. The grass was a healthy shade of green and perfectly cut. There was a large koi pond at the far end of the property with many small shrubs lining the fence. The largest attraction, though, was the huge sakura tree in the middle of the yard. It was beautifully cultivated and provided ample shade along with setting the atmosphere with the bright pink petals blowing in the cool autumn wind. None of these wonderful sights were the ones that drew Ichigo's attention, though. It was something even more mesmerizing that his eyes zoned in on. In the middle of the yard, sitting elegantly underneath the sakura tree, gently strumming a moon guitar with numerous pink sakura petals falling around her, was perhaps the most beautiful woman Ichigo has ever seen in his life. She sat in seiza, which only seemed to enhance her seemingly fragile and demure beauty. She was dressed in an exquisite black silk kimono with intricate purple designs running along the edges. She had midnight black hair that seemed to suck in all the light from around her, with a small portion pulled to the back that was held in place with a pin barrette in the shape of a crescent moon that seemed to be made of bone fragments, with various charms hanging down from it, along with unblemished porcelain skin that could be seen from her elegant fingers and her beautiful feet that were left bare. Her lips were plump and a healthy shade of pink. Her eyebrows were immaculate, and her facial structure screamed nobility. Her eyes, though, were piercing and seemed to cut into his very soul. They were a startling shade of purple and shined beautifully. That, along with her seemingly immaculate mannerisms and casual beauty, made Ichigo feel like he was in the presence of an empress. A melodious laugh brought Ichigo out of his musings. The woman before him laughed demurely behind her hand as she gazed at him. "It is flattering that you have such high praise for me, Ichigo-sama," the woman said, her voice just as hauntingly beautiful as the rest of her. That snapped Ichigo out of his trance as he scrutinized the ethereal woman before him. She had a warm smile on her face as she gazed at him, something that caught him off guard. He mentally smacked himself for having been caught up in his musings. This woman could be the enemy. He had no idea what was happening. Who are you? Where's Zangetsu-asen? Ichigo demanded. The woman still just smiled at him as she gestured to a place in front of her. Zangetsu isn't here anymore. I'm sure you have already figured that out, she replied, confirming Ichigo's fears. He let out a shaky breath as he took a seat opposite the woman. He wanted so badly to freak out right now, but he didn't want to put on an unseemly display before this regal-looking woman. So he swallowed his anxieties for later and peered expectantly at her, for she seemed to hold the answers that he needed. I know you have a lot on your mind right now, and there is a lot you wish to know. I will do my best to explain to you the circumstances that led to this. All I ask of you is that you be patient and allow me to explain, the woman suggested. Ichigo took the time to calm his beating heart and get himself under control. He gave the woman a nod, signaling her to go on. To answer your previous question, Zangetsu is here no longer. You will never be able to meet him again, she told him bluntly with an expressionless look on her face. Ichigo's expression was one of anguish as he heard those words. It was a horrible reality to face for him at the thought of not seeing his partner again. In case you're wondering, it has nothing to do with the final Getsu Gaten's-ho that you performed, she finished, using air quotes when mentioning the final Getsu Gaten's-ho. Ichigo's head snapped up in shock at her words. What? Then how? He asked frantically. Nothing was making sense to him anymore. He lost his Shinigami powers, and by extension his Zanpakuto, when he used his ultimate technique. But now this woman was saying that wasn't the case. Do you remember the last thoughts you had before you lost consciousness? She asked him. Ichigo shook his head negatively. You desired to keep your powers, to better understand yourself, to once again feel the level of completeness that the final Getsuga Tenzo momentarily granted you. She informed him. Ichigo seemed to faintly recall thinking such things before the darkness encompassed him. What happened, Ichigo-sama, was that your wish was granted, she said, confusing him. You see, when you thought these things, your desire for the truth was strong, coupled with the transcendent state you were in along with the tenacity you've showed, it was enough for the Hogyoku to grant your deepest desire, she stated. A look of horror appeared on Ichigo's face at the mention of the orb that was at the center of the entire war that was fought. The thought that he was influenced in some way by that artifact was frightening. The woman chuckled elegantly into the back of her head at the sight of Ichigo's expression. He was just too cute for his own good. Relax, Ichigo-sama, the Hogyoku is still implanted within Aizen Susk. From what I was able to gather, it sealed itself away after you defeated him, she informed him, making him sigh in relief. So how did it grant my wish? He questioned confusedly, as he scratched his head. By uniting the opposing forces within you, she answered simply. The power that you carry is unique. No individual in the history of the world has ever had the potential that you do. However, the forces within you were constantly clashing with one another. That resulted in your powers fighting against you. It is the reason why you felt so uncomfortable with your own power, and why it was so difficult for you to control. Ichigo nodded slowly, still not fully comprehending what she had meant by the forces within him. Was she referring to the Hollow? I can see you're still a bit confused, so allow me to inform you of your origins. It was a truth that has been hidden from you for far too long. I believe you deserve to know it. You see, Ichigo-sama, while your father was a former Shinigami captain, your mother, on the other hand, was a pure-blood Quincy, one of the last and most powerful, she informed him, making Ichigo freeze in shock, his mind barely comprehending what he had just heard. It shattered most of the beliefs he had in the way of the world thus far. It was incomprehensible to him. And Mom? A Quincy? Is this some kind of sick joke? Are you here to get revenge for Aizen by twisting my mind with your lies? Ichigo raged, barely able to maintain his sanity in the wake of the revelations. The woman was expressionless from the onslaught of Ichigo's anger and confusion, though if you looked deeper, you would see the sliver of hurt she felt at his accusations. But she knew that he could not be blamed. These truths were hard to bear for him, especially considering all that he's been through and for how long it has been kept hidden. Ichigo continued to hurl abuse at the woman, who just sat calmly and took it all. After a few minutes, he seemed to have got all that he needed to out of his system. He was taking deep breaths, trying to make sense of the situation. He was so lost, so confused. As he looked to the source of his anger, he couldn't help but feel ashamed of himself. Regardless of whether she was speaking the truth or not, he should have never treated her in such a way. His beloved mother raised him to be a gentleman. He always did his best to respect women, except for when they were completely undeserving of it, like Soifan. Most people call him a prude, but he didn't care. The woman before him has been nothing but accommodating and courteous. He had no right to go off like he did. I'm sorry, miss. I had no right to speak to you in such a manner. Please forgive me, Ichigo said with an apologetic expression on his face. The woman smiled a beautiful smile in return, clearly looking like she expected no less from him. I understand, Ichigo-sama. It must be a lot to take in. But please believe me when I say that I would never lie to you. It goes against my very nature, for I would rather die than do such a thing, she declared. The resolve and determination in her eyes took Ichigo by surprise. He didn't think he would get that kind of reaction from her. It was mind-boggling to him. He decided, at least till he knew more, to trust this woman's words. She didn't seem to be the deceitful type. And more than anything, he was desperate for the truth. After giving her a nod, she smiled in relief before continuing. Like I was saying, your mother was a pure-blood Quincy. However, some time before you were born, she was attacked and infected by a vasto Lord-level hollow. It infected her very soul, and even though she managed to survive, a piece of it was always within her. Until you came along, that is. Ichigo was listening with intrigue. He didn't know what else to do in this situation. When you were conceived, considering your hybrid nature along with the unnaturally large Riryoku reserves you possessed even as a fetus, the hollow latched onto your soul, which was still young and malleable. The result was you being a more natural version of the ones you call wizards. She finished. Ichigo sat in silence, digesting all that he had been told. So my inner hollow came from my mother? I thought that it was the result of the shattered shaft training that Getabushi made me go through to regain my powers. He questioned. Not entirely, it just brought forward that aspect of your soul much faster than it normally would have. However, what I want you to take from this, Ichigo-sama, is that you are a hybrid of all three supernatural races. The most natural blend of Shinigami, Quincy, Hollow and human. She gave Ichigo some time to process that revelation. He looked to be taking it well for the most part, but she knew that he was doing his best to suppress any explosive reactions in favor of listening to what she had to say. It was quite endearing of him. With that being said, let me ask you this. If you have three aspects of the supernatural residing within you, why did you only have two spirits dwelling inside of you? More importantly, which spirit represented which power? She questioned him. Ichigo's eyes widened at that thought. Now that he thought about it, and now that he had a clearer understanding of who he was, it didn't make much sense to him. It looked like he really didn't know much about himself at all. What I'm going to tell you may upset you, Ichigo-sama, but please understand that it is all the truth. She warned, getting a hesitant nod in return from the still dazed boy. You see, throughout all the battles you've fought through thus far, not once have you ever used your Shinigami powers. She dropped the bombshell, making him splutter in indignation. What dash? That's crazy! I have a Zanpakuto. I achieved Shirkai along with my Bankai. How the hell do you explain that? Ichigo shouted. Simple. When a soul enters Shino Academy for Shinigami training, they are given an Asachi, essentially a blank sword, which allows them to imprint their soul onto it, eventually leading to them awakening their Zanpakuto. It is the base of every Zanpakuto in existence, even the Sotaicho. There can be no Zanpakuto without an Asachi. Which begs the question, how did you have a Zanpakuto when you never given an Asachi to imprint upon? She questioned rhetorically. Ichigo's eyes widened at that bit of information. Nobody ever told him that. The answer is simple, Ichigo-sama. From the very beginning, you were never using your Shinigami powers to begin with. Ichigo gaped at her. It was all so crazy sounding to him that he wanted to just flip a table in frustration, but this woman seemed so sincere and forthcoming in her words. It didn't help that there was some primal part of him that seemed to agree with her words. Like they somehow made sense to him. You see, from the formation of your Shirkai, to your signature move, the Getsuga Tenzo, to your Bankai, all of it was done with subconscious erasure manipulation. It was basically you wielding a fake set of powers that never even existed in the first place. Let me ask you another question. When you refer to the one known as Zangetsu, are you referring to the pale version of yourself, or the gentleman in the dark clothing? She inquired knowingly. The old man, obviously. He's Zangetsu. The other is my inner hollow. Ichigo answered robotically, still reeling from the information dump. The woman just smiled apologetically at him in return. I'm sorry to say this, but the one you refer to as your inner hollow has always been Zangetsu. She informed him. Ichigo choked on his saliva at that absurd statement. It went against everything he believed in. The very basis of all his struggles lay at the feet of that damned hollow. I told you that you inherited that hollow from your mother, remember? When you were born, it latched onto your soul, more specifically, the Shinigami portion of your soul, as hollows are extremely poisonous to Quincy's. The one you refer to as your inner hollow was actually a representation of both your hollow and Shinigami powers. The man in the dark clothing, however, he was a representation of your Quincy abilities. Therefore, as previously stated, you were never using any Shinigami powers to begin with, nor were you wielding your true Zanpakuto. It was all a facade created by your inner Quincy. Ichigo felt nauseated at what he was hearing. He couldn't help but think back to his training with the wizards. Flashback. Where's Zangetsu-asen? Ichigo demanded as he stood across from his hollow in his inner world. Still haven't figured it out? When you say Zangetsu, do you mean the one in your hands? Or the one in mine? Wanna know where Zangetsu is? The truth is, I am Zangetsu. His hollow roared as it charged at him. Flashback, and all this time, his hollow, no Zangetsu was telling him the truth. All he did was reject everything Zangetsu ever said or did, trying desperately to detach himself from associating with anything to do with him. Instead, he believed in and trusted a man who seemed to be lying to him and manipulating him from the very beginning. Did it not occur to you the parallels between the so-called final Getsuga Tensho and the Let's Still technique that was used by your Quincy friend, Ishida Yuryu? Back when you invaded Soul Society, he was barely at the level of the weaker lieutenants, yet with that technique, he effortlessly defeated a captain at the cost of his powers. Does it sound familiar to you? Why? Ichigo whispered brokenly, the very foundations of his belief and existence being shattered before him. Why would my inner Quincy, as you say, do this to me? The man that you thought of as Zangetsu actually has a name, one that all Quincy and some Shinigami know of. His name is Yhwach, she stated. He is the greatest enemy Soul Society has ever known, far greater than any threat Aizensus could have posed. He is known as the Quincy King, the progenitor of the entire race. His blood runs through the veins of all Quincy. Most never experience him the way you have, though. Due to your hybrid nature and having an inner world, your Quincy aspect actually gained sentience in the form of Yhwach from 1,000 years ago, before he was sealed away by Yamamoto Genryusei. His motives are hard to understand. From what I can gather, he wanted you to be powerless, to live a normal life free from the spiritual world. For his greatest fear was that if you kept on the path you were, he would eventually kill you. Kill me? Why would a part of my own soul want to kill me? Wouldn't that mean he would cease to exist as well? Ichigo questioned. No, Ichigo-sama. There is a legend passed down amongst the Quincy. It goes like this. The sealed king of the Quincy, whose heart began beating again after 9 centuries, whose reason and intelligence then followed 9 decades later, and whose strength came back 9 years after that. It means that the enemy known as Yhwach is still alive and is only a few years away from fully awakening. Normally, this would be of no consequence to you, however. I believe you will be most interested in this development in regards to how it affects your mother's death. As soon as the words left her mouth, the air became heavy with Ichigo's Ryatsu. His eyes sharpened and zeroed in on her in a way that sent chills down her spine. Remember, your mother was a Quincy, a pure-blood one at that. She was at the level of a captain-class fighter. She defeated an extremely powerful Vasto Lord when she was still a teenager. So how is it that a regular, weak hollow like Grand Fisher was able to kill her? Logic dictates that she would have swatted him aside like a bug. However, there is a ritual that was carried out on that fateful day. The holy selection of the Quincy, Oslin. In order to achieve full power, Yhwach handpicked what he deemed as impure Quincies and took their powers for his own. It was an unfortunate coincidence that the moment Yhwach initiated Oswalin, your mother was attacked by a hollow, leaving her defenseless. Ichigo sat in silence. He could feel a small gathering of tears as he heard the story of his mother's bad luck. It didn't make him less upset about her death, but he felt as though a small weight was lifted off his shoulders. It was as though the veil that was hampering his vision was slowly peeled away and he could finally perceive the truths of the world. For the last 7 years, he spent almost every waking minute wondering if his mother would still be alive if he wasn't so stupid as to, unknowingly, rush straight into danger like he did. He bore the brunt of her death on his shoulders, feeling the guilt and self-loathing eating away at him on a daily basis. He wished he could go back and do things differently. Now, though, this new information, it lifted the burden he's been hauling around for the last 7 years. His mother was strong. She was a powerful woman who could take care of herself. It was the tyranny of this Yhwach character coupled with her bad luck that led to her death. For the first time in a long time, Ichigo felt like he could maybe start to move on. For the longest time, he sought to punish himself. He was always rushing into danger, when he invaded Soul Society to save Rukia or when he invaded Hueco Mundo for Oriheim. He never put much value in his life as he was always prepared to sacrifice himself. Maybe it was his way of self-atonement. It was a subconscious thing. He would never know. But now that he knew the truth, he would try to move on, to honor the memory of his mother rather than to seek self-punishment for her death. The woman looked on impassively as Ichigo struggled with the information that was presented to him. She knew it was a risk to reveal everything him, but it needed to be done. For far too long has he been kept in the dark, hampered from reaching his true potential. She needed him to trust her, to know that she has his best interests at heart. He couldn't go on denying a part of himself any longer. She knew, though, that he had the strength of mind to overcome this hurdle and embrace his true nature. And she would be with him every step of the way, supporting and empowering him. Why? Why didn't Dad tell me any of this? Who else knew? Ichigo questioned bitterly. As far as I know, Urahara Kisuke, Shihohin Yorichi, Tsukabashi Tensai and Ishida Ryukin were all aware of your situation and the circumstances surrounding you, she informed him. Ichigo gritted his teeth as his face contorted in anger. All this time, they knew what really happened. All these years he's been suffering with the guilt that's been eating away at him. Why didn't anybody ever say anything? Why didn't his father explain this to him when he awakened his powers? Was it because they needed him to sacrifice himself to defeat Aizen? Did they want him ignorant and fumbling about, never knowing the true scope of his very soul? Knowing Kisuke, that's probably exactly what his was about. Whenever he had a question, the answers he received only led to even more questions. He was only given just enough to get him by, leading to him charging headfirst into any situation with his reckless behavior and disregard for his own safety. He was the perfect weapon. Self-sacrificing and obedient. It was like it was some big game to them, and he was the entertainment. Okay, maybe that isn't how it is. They weren't malicious people by nature. Maybe it truly was for the good of the world. It means little to him, though, who seemed to be everybody's puppet in this grand game called life. Whether it was Aizen, Kisuke, his father, or even this Yawatch character, everybody seemed to have more say about his life than he did. That ends today. He took a deep breath to calm himself, his anger slowly ebbing away. He knew that Kisuke and Yorichi were good people, but surely had a reason for doing what they did. He wouldn't begrudge them that. However, just because he could understand the motivations behind their actions, it didn't mean that he could overlook them just like that. The same goes for his father. He surely had a reason for keeping this all for him. Maybe he didn't want Ichigo involved in the supernatural world, in a life of constant fights and struggles. It was too late for that, though. He was already deeply immersed in it. He could understand his father wanting to protect him from the truth. It sometimes could be more damaging than any lie could ever hope to be. But in this case, his father made the wrong choice. Knowing what he knows now could have changed so much and helped him more than they could ever know. So while he could never hate his father, for the man always did his best for his family, there was a measure of trust that Ichigo lost towards him and probably wouldn't gain back for a while. The same goes for Kisuke and Yorichi. He looked into the eyes of the woman, his gaze piercing her very soul. She didn't shy away from his gaze, instead she met it head-on, baring her soul to him with a warm smile on her face. There are no words that I can say that could convey how much I appreciate what you just told me. You freed me from the shackles I placed upon myself all those years ago. I can finally look towards the future with a hope that didn't exist before, he said to her, before his eyes sharpened dangerously. That begs the question, though, who are you? You should already know the answer to that question, Ichigo-sama. I told you, the Hogyoku granted your deepest desire and inadvertently acted as the catalyst to unite the powers within you, allowing to achieve a perfect balance, far more so than what Aizen Susuke attempted. It not only united the powers dwelling in your soul, but also allowed Kyoka Suigetsu, who was rejected by her wielder, to join in the unification process, granting her desire for a kind and compassionate wielder who would not abuse her powers. I am the amalgamation of Zangetsu, Kyoka Suigetsu, and the portion of Yawatch that resided in your soul, creating something new and more in tune with your nature. I know all that they know, but I am a completely different entity. Who I am is the representation of your power, your truest partner, the reflection of your soul. I am your true Zanpakuto. My name is Mugetsu. Ichigo whispered almost reverently, causing a happy smile to appear on the face of the now named Mugetsu. The name was instinctive to Ichigo. He didn't even realize he said it till she reacted. It just came so naturally to him. Like it was always sitting on the tip of his tongue. That is correct, Ichigo-sama. I am Mugetsu. I am your Zanpakuto. The real one this time. It is a pleasure to meet you. She bowed to him, which he returned in mind. My name, as you may have noticed, is the same as the attack you used in the final Getsuga Tensho form. For it was in that state that you came the closest to wielding your true power, which was why you felt so comfortable compared to the normal discomfort you felt when wielding your power. She informed him. Mugetsu. Ichigo whispered, tasting the name on his tongue. He smiled warmly at her. I look forward to getting to know you, he said to her, before suddenly jolting in realization. But wait, I could feel my power leaving me before I passed out. What exactly is happening? It's very simple, you are transcending, Mugetsu answered. Do you remember when Aizen Susk was continuously evolving? He eventually reached a point at which his Ryatsu could no longer be felt by others. You achieved such a state temporarily as well. Unlike Aizen, though, who is artificial, you are a perfect transcendent. All your power flows naturally within you. You are everything he wished he could be. You felt your power leaving, so to speak, when it was actually evolving. In about 2 weeks, it will seem to others as if you have no Ryatsu due to the face that you have transcended so far beyond their understanding. She explained. Ichigo took in all she said, a look of deep contemplation on his face. He would normally be freaking out right about now, but Mugetsu's presence, now that he knows who she truly is, soothed him. Add in the fact that he finally made a bit of peace with his mother's death, it made him think a little more before rushing in as he normally would have done, for even though most people wrote him off as a brute or a delinquent, Ichigo was rather intelligent. His being in the top 25 students in his school proved that he could think when he needed to. So he sat in contemplation, trying to figure out his next move. Mugetsu sat patiently beside him, waiting to hear what her wielder has to say. You said that in a few days, nobody will be able to sense my Ryatsu. How sure are you of that? Can I really bypass the senses of the Shinigami, and that includes whatever machines Kisuke or Kuratsuchi could come up with? He questioned intently. Hi. I'm absolutely positive. Like I said, your Ryatsu will be on a level that would not be comprehensible to them. In terms of mathematics, you would be a 5-dimensional polygon in a world filled with 3-dimensional beings. You are on a completely different plane of existence as compared to them. Even their tracker won't be able to take in your Riryoku any longer. She said. Wait, what tracker? Ichigo blinked in confusion. Oh. I didn't tell you about that yet. The combat pass that you were given, it isn't really an artifact that holds any authority. What it does is takes in your Riryoku for them to analyze and dissect. It allows them to listen in on your conversations and ascertain your threat level. In layman's terms, it's a device they use to spy on you and make sure they are in control. Ichigo just exhaled deeply at that revelation. He honestly expected it to be something like that. He remembered how the Shinigami on duty in Karakura Town, Emoyama or something, didn't even recognize the combat pass. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that they were spying on him. Even after all they have been through. He couldn't expect any different, though. The Soul Society was a hypocritical place filled with hypocritical, self-righteous people. He looked past all that in these last few months, as he was always zeroed in on some kind of enemy. Ironically, almost all the enemies he's dealt with on their behalf originated from the Godiai 13. Very well. They believe that I am going to lose my powers soon. Let's keep it that way. When my power finally stabilizes and evolves as you said it would, let them assume that I have indeed lost my powers. While I do care for some of them and have no intention of harming anyone, I'm tired of being their weapon. I refuse to be used by anyone any longer, whether it's the Soul Society or Urahara Kisuke. I'll just pretend that I'm a regular human again while going on with my life. If there are any threats to my family or my town, I will deal with it. But from now on, The Soul Society needs to learn to deal with their own problems," Ichigo declared resolutely. "Although I feel bad for my friends like Rukia or Rinji, I can't take any chances. I can't be sure if they know about the situation. Rinji is a lieutenant, so there is a chance he does know and is in on it. I will decide what the nature of our future relationship will be from their reactions to me losing my power. If they truly are my friends, they will prove it in that time. Until then, I'll just feign ignorance. Knowing those idiots in the Central 46 and the attitude of some of the captains, they will see me as a threat now that I have the power to defeat someone like Aizen. If they didn't think I was losing my powers, I can comfortably see myself being executed or sharing a prison cell with Aizen." Ichigo can honestly say that is the most likely scenario if he spoke the truth. They would label him a dangerous threat and execute him on sight. While he may have helped them change a few of their more archaic traditions, he has no doubt that he will be put down for the greater good of Soul Society. This was the same place that almost executed Rukia without hesitation because she helped save his life. As long as the Central 46 orders it, he was no doubt that the captains would obediently carry out any order, even those he regarded as his friends. It wasn't something that he enjoyed thinking about, as he honestly considered some of them his close friends, having fought alongside them these past few months. But if you consider his defeat of Aizen, his absurd growth level, factor in his hollow nature, and you have a recipe for disaster. If they found out about his mother being a Quincy, he would not be surprised in the slightest if that disgusting piece of vermin, Kuratsuchi Mayuri, petitioned to have him experimented on. Considering all the heinous crimes he's been allowed to get away with, Ichigo isn't holding his breath for the Sotaicho to deny him. For far too long has he been looking at the Soul Society through rose-tinted glasses. There are many things wrong with the place, and he willfully ignored them as he tried not to think about the situation of the ordinary souls. Greed, corruption, and arrogance have permeated the Godai 13 at its very core. For the longest time they have gone unchallenged that they started to believe themselves invincible. Of course not all of them are that way, and there are many good people still there, many he would count as his friends. But he isn't sure how long it would stay that way if he was deemed too powerful to be left loose. For the first time in his life, he needed to stop thinking with his heart and start thinking with his head. Theirs was far too much at risk to do otherwise, so while he was still not fully comprehensible in terms of what to make of the information he's been told, he is savvy enough to know that he needs the attention off of him if he is to deal with it on his own, away from prying eyes. Mugetsu nodded in acceptance, happy that her wielder was taking the reins when it came to his life. She didn't want him to be used by anyone. She wanted him to be his own man, and she would do everything in her power to help him achieve his destiny. "I am behind you 100%, Ichigo-sama," she responded, causing Ichigo to smile back happily at her, one of the first true smiles he's given in a long time. While he will miss Zangetsu-asan and even his hollow, and he would grieve for them when he's in a more controlled environment, Mugetsu was proving to be a far more suitable and agreeable companion to him. "If it isn't too much trouble, can I make a few suggestions to aid you on this path you are about to take?" she questioned politely, causing Ichigo to nod in acceptance. "Well, even though your Ryatsu will soon become undetectable, it will still have an effect on the environment around you. You will need to learn how to have proper control of your power. While your power and determination in a fight is what got you this far, you are severely lacking proper discipline and control in the various combat arts. I don't mean it as an insult. It is actually quite admirable for you to have come this far, considering that you were left to fend for yourself for the most part. What I wish to propose is that proper training needs to be done in order to not only get a better grasp of your power but to also temper your attitude and achieve proper discipline," Mugetsu suggested bluntly, not sugar-coating it at all. Ichigo blushed in embarrassment at her critique. He couldn't deny the truth in her words, though. He really didn't have much of a grounding in terms of his powers. The training he received amounted to 10 days of fighting Urahara, 3 days trying to achieve Bankai with Yoruichi, and less than a month spent with the Vizard's taming and controlling his inner hollow. It wasn't the most impressive training regimes. Looking back, he can honestly say that it is nothing short of a miracle that he made it this far on such a fragile foundation. He regretted not doing more to bolster himself back then. He should have taken a more active role in trying to better himself. But his attitude didn't allow him that. Hindsight is 20/20, and he can appreciate the fact that if Mugetsu hadn't told him what she did, he would probably still be a brooding mess. It will still take some time, but hopefully in time, he can come to terms with his demons and move on. Well, he had the opportunity now to change all the shortcomings that he's come to perceive in himself. He would do his best to make the most of it. Well, I guess you're right. But since I'm going to be going on as if I lost my powers, I can't just use Urahara's training ground. I could maybe join a dojo to learn kendo, and various forms of martial arts. The skill set should be transferable. I can join under the guise of me wanting to keep busy now that I lost my powers, along with the fact that I already have experience in these fields from all the fighting I've done, and therefore it comes naturally to me. Ichigo pondered out loud. Excellent suggestion. While it may be a little slower in term of progress, as it's much easier to train in soul form, building up your physical body at the right way to go. Those arts, as you have stated, can easily be transferred to Zanjutsu and Hakuda. It will also help you become more disciplined. I'm suggesting maybe going for a run in the mornings as well. While you train your physical body during the day, when you sleep I will pull you into your inner world to train your spirit and your mind. Eh? You're going to train me? Ichigo asked with a dumbfounded expression on his face. Mugetsu chuckled at him once again. Because I'm an amalgamation of Zangetsu, Jiaowachi and Kyokusujutsu, I also have access to all of their knowledge. There are many different techniques and abilities I can train you in, including both hollow and Quincy techniques. Not to mention, Kyokusujutsu was a veritable goldmine of information. As Aizen Susk Zanpakuto, she had access to all of his knowledge. While he may have been a megalomaniac with a massive god complex, Aizen Susk was truly a genius. His knowledge of Zanjutsu, Hakuda, Hoho, Kido as well as war tactics and the history and intricacies of Soul Society are second to none. I plan on drilling all of this knowledge into you, she informed him. Ichigo may have been imagining it, but he could have sworn her eyes glinted sadistically when he told him that. It made a shiver go down his spine. At first, Ichigo was a bit apprehensive at the thought of being taught from Aizen's knowledge, but eventually buried the doubt deep within him. Mugetsu was right. For all his faults, the man was a genius. Learning from him would be beneficial. It didn't mean he would become like him, though. He would do his utmost to stay away from that path. He would take the knowledge that he gained, put it to good use in protecting his loved ones. I will keep you in a coma for the next 7 days, making it so you stay in your inner world. For those 7 days, I will teach you all the tricks and techniques I know about controlling your Ryatsu until you achieve perfect control, she declared. Wait! 7 days? That's not enough time, Ichigo protested. Era, were you not the one that achieved Bankai in only 3 days? The greatest power you have, Ichigo-sama, is your monstrous growth potential coupled with your outrageous learning curve. I have absolute confidence that you will be able to achieve the perfect control needed in that time span. Especially since you will have me instructing you properly as compared to that worthless shopkeeper who only gives you breadcrumbs to go on, she stated imperiously. Ichigo just chuckled at her, conceding that she had a point. He didn't need to think about the negatives. He would just do what needed to be done, just like he had always done. When you wake up, though, there is something that you definitely need to do. Like I said before, there can exist no Zanpakuto without the use of an Asachi. We need to get our hands on one. Luckily for us, the Shino Spirit Academy keeps a large stock of Asachi for new students. When you awaken, you need to sneak into the academy and steal one of them. I doubt anyone will notice one of them missing. Once you have it, I will help you use Reisher manipulation to coat the blade in a structure that is identical to your old shurikai, like a cocoon. That way we can smuggle it out of the Soul Society without anybody knowing. Once your power finally stabilizes, you can project your Riryoku onto the Asachi and awaken me and finally have a real Zanpakuto. Ichigo, despite being a pretty mature guy for the most part, couldn't keep the gleam of excitement out of his eyes at the thought of wielding his real Zanpakuto. It was a part of him, a true extension of his soul. He was meant to wield it. And despite his protests and his complaints, he really did love a good fight. It annoyed him to be associated with the likes of Kenpachi and Grimjow, but the thrill of battle really got his blood pumping. He was born to be a warrior, and he decided that he would need to take the time to come to terms with that and embrace that part of him. Looking back, that was one of the greatest shortcomings he had. He wanted to be normal. So he rejected parts of himself, even before he became a Shinigami. He always fought against his nature to be something that he perceived as ordinary. But he knows now, he was never meant to ordinary. After all he's been through and knowing the truth about his heritage, he can happily embrace the parts that he constantly rejected. Enjoying a good fight was just a small aspect, but one that he would now welcome. He won't be a crazy battle maniac like those two previously mentioned though, no way. Mugetsu smiled happily at the sight of her wielder's excitement. To be honest, she felt the same. She couldn't wait to be brandished in battle by her wielder. Putting those thoughts aside for now, she slowly got to her feet and dusted herself off. Ichigo rose to meet her. Putting on a stern face, she faced him with a no-nonsense look in her eyes. Okay, for the next 7 days, I will teach you everything I know that will enable you to control the enormous reserves of power you have. Please pay strict attention and do your best, Ichigo-sama. She told him in a stern tone of voice. You got it. He replied with a thumbs up, before looking sheepishly at her. You can just call me Ichigo. I'm not one for formalities. Hi, Ichigo-sama. She persisted, causing Ichigo to look at her with her deadpan expression. The stubborn look in her eyes told him that he wouldn't be winning this battle. Now, I want you to concentrate. Take in a deep breath and try to center yourself. I know I made it sound easy when I said I would teach it to you, but this is a very delicate process. You can't brute force your way through this like you would normally do. You will need a certain amount of finesse. Are you ready? Hi! Ichigo declared resolutely, his unbending will and determination shining through. Mugetsu smiled at this. She had complete faith in her wielder. She knew better than anyone the kind of resolve he possessed. And now, after everything he has been through, and all the light that has been shed on his heritage, he looked a lot more at peace with himself. For all the trouble that it caused, the Hogyoku really gave Ichigo the greatest reward he could ask for. He was now complete. His future was now firmly in his own hands, and she knew that he would carve out a path that would lead only to greatness. Unprotected face, Ichigo groaned in protest. The lingering effects of his long nap having yet to leave his system. Slowly fluttering his eyes open, he was met by a warm radiance instead of the harsh glare that he expected. He slowly sat up on the bed he was in. Looking around, he realized he was in an infirmary. By the looks of the architecture, he was definitely in the Soul Society. The only logical choice left was the 4th Division barracks. After clearing out that mystery, he stretched his arms out and bent his back to work out any kinks he may have had. As his bones satisfyingly popped into place, the side door of the room he was in opened. As the person who walked out finally looked up, she startled a little when she saw Ichigo awake. She blushed a little in embarrassment at being caught off guard because she was daydreaming. As Ichigo took in her features, he noticed that she was quite tall for a woman, standing at a height of at least 6 feet 1 inch, with steel gray eyes and short messy silver hair with strands on the right side of her face that are shoulder length and styled as 2 thin brains. She wears a thin dangling red earring on each ear along with a standard Shinigami uniform that did little to hide the very curvy figure that she possessed. There was also a lieutenant's badge on her left arm. He recognized her as one of the lieutenants he knocked out on Tsukioku Hill when he rescued Rukia. If he wasn't mistaken, she was the lieutenant of the 4th Division. Hi. He started before embarrassingly scratching his cheek. Sorry, I never got your name. Oh. My apologies. My name is Kotetsu Aisane. She shyly introduced herself. Right, nice to meet you, Aisane. Well, formally at least. He chuckled weakly, hoping the girl didn't hold a grudge against him for knocking her out back then. How long have I been out? It's been about 8 days since you defeated Captain Aizen and collapsed shortly afterwards due to immense strain on your body. For the most part, you are fully healed. Physically, you are 100%. Your Ryatsu, on the other hand, is wildly fluctuating and doesn't seem to be stable at all. I was told you would be aware of this as well as the reasons, so there's no need to go into detail," she recited professionally as she read his chart. Ichigo just nodded his head in acceptance, not wanting to say any more on the subject, before looking off into space. Aisane felt the somber mood the room currently took. It wasn't much of a surprise to her, considering what Ichigo went through. Having fought off the Espada and Hueco Mundo before having a titanic battle with the monster that Aizen Susk became, all in the space of a few days, it must have really taken its toll on him, both physically and mentally. If that wasn't enough, he made the ultimate sacrifice to save them all. Sacrificing his power, literally a piece of his soul, to save the world. He was a hero in every sense of the word. Aisane couldn't keep the awe and admiration out of her eyes as she silently gazed at him. She was honest enough with herself to admit that she had developed a small crush on him, ever since she saw him on Tsukioka Hill. She was positive that she wasn't the only one among the female Shinigami that harbored a crush on the orange-haired substitute. Watching him fight for his beliefs and the lives of his friends and having the courage to stand up to the powerful captains along with the determination to follow his own moral compass, it was inspiring to someone like her, who was always a little lacking in terms of self-confidence. Despite being a lieutenant, she had her fair share of insecurities. She can honestly say that watching him fight inspired her to be a little more that she thought she could be. If someone like him, who's only 15 years old and still just a boy, can make the enormous sacrifice that he did and still look at her with a content smile on his face, what right did she have to wallow in her self-pity? She vowed to try to be better, not only for herself, but as a way to thank Ichigo for his sacrifice. She was snapped out of her thoughts by the sound of his voice. "So how have things been since the war ended?" he asked casually in an attempt to strike up conversation with the buxom medic. There's been a lot of partying, a lot of drinking, and a lot of silly shenanigans." She giggled as she remembered one particular memory involving a drunk Zaraki Taicho, a pink tutu, a jar of hummus, and a rubber duck. She quickly came back to reality though when she saw Ichigo smiling at her reaction, having realized that she had giggled in front of him. Clearing her throat, she continued. "The So Taicho has given most of the captains and lieutenants a small vacation window to rest and recover from the fights, so there hasn't been much else in terms of work being done. Unohana Taicho and the rest of the 4th Division have been hard at work though. There have been a lot of injuries and a lot of clean-up that needed to be done after the battle." Ichigo nodded his head in acceptance of her answer. He was about to speak up again before the door to his room burst open. Orihime, Rukia, Chad, Renji, and Ishida all flooded in. Ichigo just looked at them with a flat stare, having honestly expected something like this to happen soon. These guys honestly had no sense of propriety. He shared a bemused glance with Aisane, who smiled encouragingly before leaving the room, giving the group their privacy. "Kurosaki-kun!" Orihime whimpered out his name, large tears gathering at the corner of her eyes. Ichigo just looked at her in fond exasperation. "Geez, what's with the face you're making, Inoue?" he ribbed good-naturedly. "Are you doing okay?" he asked with a genuine smile on his face. Before he could hear her answer, Ichigo was smacked across the head. He would like to say that it surprised him, but he was honestly expecting it. "Idiot! You shouldn't be asking her that when you're the one everybody was worried about. What were you thinking?" Rukia berated him. Ichigo just looked at her with a deadpan expression. "It's nice to see you again too, Rukia," he said flatly with half-lidded eyes. Said girl just flushed in embarrassment at her outburst. "You look pitiful, Kurosaki." Ishida jibed as he pushed his spectacles up with his finger, causing them to glint. Ichigo completely ignored him and sent a wave to Chad, who responded by giving him a cheesy thumbs up. Afterwards, Ichigo greeted the rest, catching up with the events that he had missed out on. They told him about the different parties that were still happening even after almost a week, mostly thanks to Kairaku and Ranjaku. Not that Ichigo was surprised that it was those two leading the charge. They told him about the cleanup of Karakura town along with it being transported back to the world of the living. Everything was back to normal for the most part. Although Ichigo was happy enough with the conversation, he could almost feel the elephant in the room. They were trying hard to hide it, but he could clearly see the pity in their eyes when they looked at him. He ignored it at first, but now it was starting to irritate him. They were clearly doing their best to avoid mentioning any fights or any mention of the actual war in an attempt to keep him from thinking about his inevitable loss of power. While he wanted to tell them the truth, he decided that his silence was a better solution at this moment. He would eventually tell them if things work out well. So for now, although it was irritating, Ichigo decided to just leave them be. If it was the old him, he would have definitely called them out on it. He hated being pitted. But like he told Mugetsu, it's time for him to move on and grow up. There was no need to make a scene. He would allow them to continue their facade. He currently had more important things to worry about. Ichigo, about your powers. Rukia spoke out hesitantly. The others in the room shifted uncomfortably at the topic. Ichigo was surprised that someone actually brought it up after they did their best to avoid mentioning it so far. Ichigo just smiled softly in return. I know. I knew the consequences of what I did and I'm ready to face them. I don't regret a single thing though. I would do it again if I had the chance, he told her. The others looked at him with wide eyes at his admission before it settled into looks of respect, admiration, and acknowledgement. Oriheim still looked teary-eyed though, and Ichigo just chuckled at her behavior. I see, well, if you have no regrets then I can be at ease, Rukia replied, looking resigned at what was going to happen. Ichigo honestly felt like an asshole right now. He didn't want to deceive his friends in such a way, but he convinced himself that this was the best way to go for now. Mugetsu agreed with him. The situation right now was far too precarious, and he couldn't afford to take any chances. His life and the life of his family could be in danger if things took a turn for the worse. For now, though, he would grin and bear it. Hopefully they would forgive him for it later on. Although, if he wanted to be technical about it, he didn't really lie to them. He never told anyone he would lose his powers. That was just the assumption that his father had, and therefore it was the one everyone ran with. Even now, he told them he would face the consequences of his actions. What those consequences were, they had no way of knowing. It was a bit of a gray area, but it was a cold comfort to him in some ways. After almost 2 hours of casual conversations, they were eventually chased out of his room by the ever-smiling Anahona Taicho. Even after facing down Aizen in his transcended mutant butterfly monster form, Ichigo can honestly say that Anahona Taicho was still the most terrifying person he met. Not that he would ever say that out loud. He was terrified of facing her wrath. After she left, after doing some routine checkups on him, Ichigo reclined on his bed and enjoyed the silence. He finally had time to reflect on the last week. It was one hell of a roller coaster ride. He didn't regret any of his actions though. He sighed wistfully though, when he remembered that he won't be able to fight with Zangetsu any longer. It was a hard pill to swallow for him. Zangetsu had been his partner from the very beginning. He was there for Ichigo through the many ordeals that he faced and helped pull him through many of them. He didn't understand why Zangetsu, both of them, had been lying to him all this time. He didn't understand what agenda they seemed to be pursuing. But he still thought of them as his companions, and that didn't change even after knowing all of the things they kept from him. He will remember them with fondness, but he had a new path to walk now. He felt the comforting hum of Ryatsu pulsing through his body, understanding it as Mugetsu's way of saying that she is there for him. He smiled in contentment at that. As he looked to the side, he spotted his reflection on the window. He noticed that he still looked the same as he did when he completed his Daimai training. His hair was still longer and falling messily around his face. He could feel the longer reach of his taller body. He also noticed that his eyes now looked red, almost crimson, instead of the regular brown. He figured it being a side effect of the final Getsuga Tensho, or maybe the merging of his powers. He decided not to dwell on it. He slowly closed his eyes and relaxed his mind, willing himself to reach his inner world, deciding to spend the rest of his time here training with Mugetsu. Scene change. It was the dead of the night, and there was a stillness in the air that hung over the Siriidai. The only disturbance in the air was a black blur that was moving from rooftop to rooftop at blistering speeds. The distance being covered with each step was nothing to sneeze at either. Ichigo found that, thanks to the intensive training sessions that Mugetsu put him through, he could move at much faster speeds and cover greater distances with his Shuinpa. His control of his Riryoku was now second to none, and if it wasn't for the slight fluctuations, due to the still evolving nature of his power, one wouldn't even be able to tell he was there. It amazed him how far he had come in just 7 days. He had always had a ridiculous growth curve, but it still managed to surprise him. It helped that Mugetsu was an amazing teacher. She hypothesized that it was Kyoka Sugetsu's personality that influenced that part of her, as Aizen, before defecting, used to be an instructor at Shino Academy, hence his Zanpakuto picked up that personality trait as well before bleeding over to Mugetsu. He came to a strange appreciation that, even though the guy was a colossal asshole and a genocidal maniac, he was apparently one hell of a teacher. Ichigo clamped down hard on his power as he snuck towards the Shino Academy. He had slipped out of his room not too long ago, thankfully without drawing the attention of Unahona Taicho. It was at times like these that he was thankful for being trained by a former captain of the 2nd Division and commander of the Amatsukido. While he was normally a kick-down your door and smashing your skull kind of guy, he picked up enough from his training with her to know how to be stealthy when needed. Thinking about her, though, left a bitter taste in his mouth. He decided to push it to the back of his mind. He had a mission to carry out. Breaking into the academy was laughably easy. It would have concerned him if he actually cared about their security, which he didn't. It was just another example of the lax behavior that permeated the Godai 13. They seemed to always think that nothing would ever happen to them, until something did happen, after which they would become shocked that someone had the gall to attack the mighty Godai 13. It was that kind of attitude that made Ichigo dislike this place. Captains like Soifan and Kamamura embodied the kind of hubris that seemed to land the Godai 13 in trouble, as has happened frequently over the last few months. Ichigo put that out of his thoughts, though, as he dropped from the window into a storage room. His eyes sparkled in triumph as he spotted the hoard of blank swords stacked inside the room. Jackpot! He quickly went over and started inspecting them. For the most part, they all looked the same. Standard-length katana, with a plain circular guard and a gray hilt. It wasn't much to look at, but that would change once he finally imprinted his power upon it. Is there any difference between them, or can I just grab one of these Asachi? He questioned internally. Don't worry, they are all the same. Just pick whichever you want, and I'll help you disguise it. The gentle voice of Mugetsu answered him. Right, well, this one will do. Time to get out of here, he said before taking the Asachi that he initially picked up before silently vanishing from the room. He sped across the Siriidii once more, only this time he was making his way towards the outer edges of the place that was surrounded by trees and mountainous terrain. It seemed to be the kind of place that you would expect the main character from a Shonen Jump anime to come to train for a final battle. Whimsical thoughts aside, Ichigo snuck into a small cave and set the Asachi on his lap. Okay, Mugetsu, I'm ready. What do I do first? You don't really need to do anything for now. Normally I wouldn't have any objection to you doing this, but your Riryoku is still in a state of flux, so we can't take any chances of your hold breaking. Project a small amount of your Riryoku outwards and relax yourself and allow me to project my will through you, she suggested. Ichigo nodded and followed her advice, evening out his breathing as he entered a state of calm. Suddenly, the rocks and plants around him in the cave started to dissolve into blue particles, the erasure that held them together breaking down before rapidly moving towards Ichigo. The matter coalesced around the Asachi on Ichigo's lap, before slowly starting to even out and taking shape. After only a few seconds, the process finally completed and the erasure solidified. The Asachi that was once on Ichigo's lap now looked like an exact replica of the Shirkai state of Zangetsu that was currently draped across his back. After standing up and taking a few swings with the new sword, Ichigo nodded in satisfaction before taking the old Zangetsu off his back. He looked fondly at the sword that got him through so much. All the battles, the heartbreak and happiness. The blood, sweat, and tears he shed whilst wielding it. He would definitely miss it, but he knew he had to move on. It wasn't easy, though. There was so much more that he wanted to do. He never got the chance to thank Zangetsu, both of them, for helping him protect his loved ones. After exhaling deeply, Ichigo bid a silent farewell to his old blade, a single tear falling down his right eye. Slowly, the blade started breaking apart before finally dispersing into air in a burst of blue. There was complete silence in the stillness of the cave. "The task is complete," Mugetsu declared after a few minutes of allowing Ichigo to collect himself. "The Asachi is currently encased in a strong Reisure structure that will hold as long as we need it to. It is not dissimilar to the way your original Zanpakuto was formed, through pure Quincy Reisure manipulation. Once we get back to the world of the living and you finally complete your metamorphosis, I will allow the cocoon to disperse to allow you to finally imprint me onto the blank sword held within. But for now, this will be enough to fool the eyes of the Shinigami." Ichigo nodded in silent acceptance before quietly disappearing in a burst of Shuinpa. He was still reeling emotionally from the events. Even though his mind knew that Zangetsu would no longer be around, seeing the tangible proof, in the act of his old Zanpakuto disappearing finally hit home the finality of it. He quietly snuck back into his room without alerting anyone. He crawled into his bed and put his arm over his eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to burst forth. He allowed himself to quietly grieve for his old partner. He knew they wouldn't want him to despair like this, but he allowed himself to let go just this once. He remembered all the lessons that the both of them imparted onto him. He vowed to always strive to move forward and never look back. To let his instincts guide him and to never give in, even when things are looking tough. Mugetsu comforted him throughout the night, sending warm pulses of Ryatsu to let him know he wasn't alone. He was thankful for that. It was with a heavy heart that he finally drifted off to sleep. Scene change. The next few days passed by in a blur. Ichigo spent most of the time in his room in the 4th Division barracks. Unohana Taicho insisted that he stay put so that she could keep him under observation. He didn't have the energy or the courage to argue with her. It was an emotional few days. It took a lot of comfort from Mugetsu, but he was finally able to come to terms with Zangetsu's disappearance. He would miss them, but he knew they wouldn't want him to wallow in despair. It would only cause rain to fall in his inner world, which they both hated ironically. It was time to look forward. He had no right to let his fear cloud his mind. Now wasn't the time to hesitate, or he would die. He would not retreat, for he would age. He would take the lessons that those two and keep them close to his heart. He would not dwell on his doubts any longer. They both helped to pave a brighter future for him, and he would walk his path without fear. He had a few visitors in the last few days, apart from his regular gang. Ikaku and Yumichika stopped by, all three of them discussing the fights they had. Little Yuichiro also visited him and shared some of her candy. Ranjiku drunkenly stumbled into his room once and tried to flirt with him, and horrendously failed. That was about it. None of the captains came to see him, apart from Unohana Taicho and Kairaka Taicho. Not that he was surprised by that. He spent most of the time talking to Hanataro, who, bless his little heart, visited him every day. Ichigo was glad he could catch up with his old friend after all this time. The rest of his time was spent getting to know Icing. Ichigo found her to be excellent company. While she seemed to be perpetually shy and nervous, Ichigo was good enough judge of character to know that, underneath her shyness and insecurities, she had a core of steel. Not to mention that she was a sweet person who was naturally kind and helpful to all that she came across. That part of her reminded Ichigo of his own mother, who was always full of kindness for everyone and never hesitated to lend a hand to any who asked. That may have been what drew him to Icing. They discussed everything from the current events of Soul Society to the applications and intricacies of Kaido, healing Kido. Ichigo expressed interest in the art, explaining that his father was a doctor and that he grew up in a clinic and regularly helped his father. Icing was only too happy to explain the basics of the art, much to Ichigo's fascination. They bonded over their similar respect and experience with the medical field. Ichigo was happy to have made a new friend. It was bittersweet though, as he knew he probably wouldn't see her, or any of his other Shinigami friends for a long time. He would miss times like this. Hopefully, they will meet again soon. Those were his thoughts as he stood in front of the large Senkamen, the same one that took him back to Karakura town after he rescued Rukia. He was surrounded by Oriheim, Chad and Ishida, who were also ready to leave. Seeing them off were Rukia, Rinji, Hanataro, Isane, and Yukitake Taicho. It kind of pissed Ichigo off that none of the other captains deemed him worthy of their time. He could understand Unohana Taicho not being here as she was busy with the many patients from the war that she still had to tend to. She had already said her goodbyes and gave Isane a small break to see off her new friend. The rest of them seemed just give him a metaphorical pat on the back and sent him on his way. With the exception of the previously mentioned captain of the 4th Division, Kairaku Taicho, and now Yukitake Taicho, none of them even bothered with a simple thank you. A small part of him, though, wasn't at all surprised. The overflowing pride and arrogance of most of those captains will never allow them to acknowledge that they needed a 15-year-old to win their battles for them. That would be the same as acknowledging their own inability to do their jobs. It would be the same as admitting they were weak, and that was something that they would never do. He would hope that they would at least take some lessons to heart from this whole debacle, but it seems that the more things change, the more things stay the same. He put it out of his mind, though. He didn't care what they thought. His sacrifice was acknowledged by those he cared about, and that was more than enough. He didn't do what he did for the good of Soul Society, or to protect the Soul King, or anything like that. He didn't think himself as some hero. Aizen threatened his hometown, and by extension his friends and family. He threatened Ichigo's treasure, his beautiful little sisters. There was no force in the world that could have spared him from Ichigo's wrath after that. Yuzu and Karen were the most important people in the world to him, and he would stop at nothing to keep them safe and happy. As long as that was achieved, the acknowledgement of those stuffy captains weren't even worth his time. Let them stew in their own denial for now. Eventually there will come a time when they will need him again, and when that happens, well, it might not work out the way they think. It was an emotional goodbye as he bid farewell to his Shinigami friends. He knew that he would eventually see them again, but they didn't know that. So for him, it wasn't so much goodbye as see you later. It was with that thought in mind that he stepped through the Senkamin, giving the Soul Society a final glance. Scene change. After setting foot in Karakura town, he bid the rest of the gang farewell before taking a slow walk through Karakura town. It was late in the world of the living, as a full moon hung in the air, beautifully illuminating the silent metropolis of his hometown. There weren't that many people out at this time as he leisurely made his way to his destination. It was a quaint little flower shop that he often passed on his way to and from school. He quietly made his way into the store, confident that nobody could see him. He picked up a small bouquet of flowers, white lilies to be precise, and left the money for them on the counter. He exited the store and used Shunpa to zip towards his desired location. It took him only a few seconds to reach his destination. When he did, a look of melancholy took over his countenance. It was almost a reflex reaction on his part as he gazed at the gravestone of his mother, Kurosaki Masaki. He shook off the negativity, though, as he knelt down and placed the flowers gently on her grave. This wasn't one of those times when he came here to seek penance from his mother. No, those days of negativity and self-punishment were over. Today, he had something different to tell her. Hi, Mom. It's been a while since my last visit. A lot of crazy stuff has happened since then. Some of them you won't believe. I've met a lot of new people. Some of them are quite unique characters, and I'm sure you would find them amusing. Some, though, are best forgotten. There have been a lot of hardships and fighting that I've had to endure. I'm not sure whether you'd be proud of what I've had to do, but I know that you always taught me to never shy away from my ideals and to always stand up for what I believe in. Ichigo spoke in his mind, before exhaling deeply. I've finally found out the truth about that fateful day that we lost you. I've learned about your heritage, and let me tell you, it was an eye-opening experience to know that my sweet and loving mother once blew a Vasto Lord's brains out. I'm not upset, though. If anything, I'm proud. Now if any of the kids at school want to brag about who has the coolest mom, I can tell them that mine was a complete badass that hunted vicious monsters in her spare time. Honestly, how someone as strong and beautiful as you end up with a goofball like Dad will be something that forever escapes me. I guess love works in mysterious ways. He thought with a smile as a small chuckle escaped his lips. His quickly sobered up, though. I think I've finally been able to make peace with what happened. While I'm sure I will always carry the scars of that day with me, I think I can finally start looking forward and trying to move on. I know it's what you would want. I spent this last few years cutting myself off from everything in an effort to numb the pain, but I can see now how selfish that was. Karen and Yuzu were suffering just as much as I have. I don't think I have been the best big brother that I could have been. I'm sure those two will tell you differently. It seems that regardless of how flawed I am, they seem to still love and admire me. I've decided that I need to be better, not just for myself but for them as well. The world is suddenly looking a lot more dangerous now that my eyes have been opened, but there will be nothing that will stop me from protecting them. They will be in a similar position to myself in a few years, but I will make sure to be there for them this time. So there's nothing for you to worry about anymore, Mom. I promise I will keep our family safe in your stead. Even Dad, despite the amount of lies he's been feeding me. Rest well, Mom, and continue to watch over us. I love you. He finished before getting off the ground and dusting himself off. He gave the gravestone one last look and a small smile before disappearing in a burst of shunpa, heading in the direction of his home. He was honestly looking forward to sleeping in his bed again. It was a small comfort, but he really missed it. It was already late as he got home and his sisters were already asleep. They were safely ensconced in their respective beds, peacefully snoozing away without a care in the world, just as it should be. This is what he fought to protect. He looked fondly at them for a few minutes, before a small frown appeared on his face. Now that his control was so good, his sensory abilities became a lot sharper. Before, when his Ryatsu was going at full blast, it acted as a kind of background noise, impeding his ability to sense his surroundings. Now, though, he could sense even the tiniest sliver of Ryatsu with picture-perfect clarity. Which was why it was worrying when he felt the well of power that was thrumming within the bodies of his sisters. It was still dormant and untouched, but he could tell that they possessed immense potential. It shouldn't be surprising considering their heritage. It won't be long before that potential was realized, just as his was. He would need to address this issue as soon as possible, for he refused to keep his sisters in the dark regarding the supernatural world, especially considering that they may very well start attracting hollows soon thanks to their above-average Ryatsu. He was aware that Karen was already aware of the spiritual world and had some idea about Shinigami, but it was incomplete knowledge. He would tell them all they needed to know and give them the choice he was never afforded. He wouldn't allow them to be defenseless in this harsh world. If they ended up hating him after what they learned, then he would bear that hatred as long as they were safe and happy. Nothing else mattered to him. He was aware that there were many enemies out there, and the best way to protect them in the future was to ensure that they could protect themselves. For now, though, until they were ready, he would watch over them and had no problem eviscerating any fool who would dare threaten the safety of his family. He would tear them limb from limb before disemboweling his enemies painfully, gleefully bathing in their blood as he— Whoa! Where did that come from? Ichigo thought with a little panic as he gripped his head. The spike of intense bloodlust that he just radiated was almost palpable to him. He seriously lost it for a moment. He looked to his sisters to see that they were still undisturbed. He decided to put it to the back of his mind for now. He would question Mugetsu later. For now, though, he uttered a silent goodnight before closing the door to their room. His father didn't seem to be around. He wondered what that was about. He was probably at Urahara's. He didn't dwell on it, though. As he stepped into his room, closing the door behind him, he spotted his body on the bed. Urahara probably had it dropped off after the war. He thought. He was at first apprehensive about going back into his body. He spoke to Mugetsu about it back when they were still in Soul Society. He was worried about the negative effects that his new power might have on his human body. She quickly put his fears to rest, though, pointing out that his body couldn't have been entirely human from the very beginning. The circumstances of his birth ensured that. Not to mention that it surely adapted to the different energies coursing through Ichigo over the last 15 years, even if they were passive for most of those years. If you also factor in his now near-perfect control of his Riryoku, there was very little that his new state of being could do to his own body. If anything, Mugetsu hypothesis that the energies coursing through him will work to slowly amplify and optimize his body to suit his new power. His body was already malleable before, so it isn't a stretch to think that it would adapt to his new power that was his since his birth. She also pointed out that it is a strong possibility that he would stop aging after reaching his peak. It was a scary thought to Ichigo, one that he decided to put out of his mind until he was in a more stable state of mind to deal with it. He allowed the Sandman to claim him as he gave into the physical and mental fatigue that had been weighing him down. Scene change. When his eyes finally fluttered open again, Ichigo let out a wide yawn as he stretched his body, working out any kinks from his slumber. He noticed that it was still a little dark out. He looked to his alarm clock and noticed that it was only 3 a.m. He didn't really feel like going back to bed right now. Luckily for him, Mugetsu gave him the night off in terms of training in his inner world. While he was chomping at the bit to get more training done and learn more as well as better himself, he knew he had to pace himself. There was no hurry at the moment, so he could take it easy and learn at his own pace. That isn't to say that he would be slacking off. He made a vow to better himself, and he was going to do his utmost to be the best that he can be. Not just in terms of power but other aspects of his life as well. For too long, he shut the world out, hoping to numb his pain and his guilt. He wore a perpetual scowl and just ambled along in life, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and stewing in his anger and regret. Now, though, that wasn't a choice he would perpetuate. He would be a better person. He would be a person that his mother would be proud of. He refused to waste the life that she gave him, the one she sacrificed everything for. He would stand tall and live by his principles. It's the least he could do to honor her memory, starting with his wonderful little sisters. For the last few months, having been caught up in Soul Society's business, he's been neglecting them. He hasn't been able to spend time with them and spoil them like they deserve to be. He would start making amends starting now. He slowly got up and gathered some fresh clothes and a towel, intent on taking a hot shower. Half an hour later, having finished his shower, he was now dressed in blue faded jeans and a punk rock t-shirt. His hair was still as messy as always, though now it was longer than he normally kept it. As he looked at his reflection, he decided that he liked the look and decided that he would keep it. His red eyes were a bit disconcerting, but he could learn to live with it. It would be a constant reminder of his willingness to sacrifice and the final mark left by his former partners. He made his way down the stairs and heated up the stove, intent on cooking a warm breakfast for his sisters. Contrary to popular belief, he did know how to cook. It's just that when Yuzu took over the kitchen, Ichigo decided to allow her to do as she pleased. He realized that it was probably her way to deal with the grief of their mother's death. It was a special ritual to her. He prepared a simple serving of scrambled eggs, bacon, sausages, toast, and orange juice. It wasn't the delicately cooked meals that Yuzu prepares, but it was simple enough for Ichigo to prepare. He set the table for 4, not sure if his father would be back in time for breakfast. As he went about his business, he thought about how he would address the situation concerning their growing power. He knew he would tell them the complete truth. They needed to hear it, and they were mature enough to comprehend the depth of what he would tell them. That being said, he decided that he would hold off from telling them for a while. Things were still hot in Karakura town with Shinigami patrols amped up and running around the clock. There was also a lot of eyes on him at the moment. He would wait till things cooled down before he told them. He also needed to ensure that they were away from the many prying ears that surrounded them. Ichigo didn't want his father knowing that he was aware of the truth of his heritage. It may have been a bit petty, but Ichigo was only 15, so he reserved the right to be a little petulant. There was also the fact that he wasn't sure if his father would tell Urahara, who Ichigo wasn't the biggest fan of at the moment. No, it was safer if Ichigo kept this to himself, and only tell his sisters when he was confident of his power and their privacy. He looked up at the clock and noticed that it was almost 6. His sisters should be waking up soon. As soon as he thought that, he heard the hesitant footsteps of Yuzu along with the languid ones of her twin. Their heads peeked out from the stairway and their eyes landed on their big brother. Ichigo gave them a heartfelt smile, filled with all the warmth and love that only their big brother could give them. "Oni-ai-chan, Ichi and I!" they both shouted before rushing at him. Yuzu barreled into him like a freight train. Luckily, he was strong enough to gather her in his arms and hold her close as she babbled incoherently about missing him. Karen was more subdued in her greeting, though the longing in her eyes told him that her tough girl persona wouldn't allow her to get all mushy. Ichigo was having none of that though, as he put his free arm around her and dragged her into their group hug. At first she protested, but even he could tell it was half-hearted at best. She finally gave in though, and settled for the warm embrace of her big brother. Content that he was finally home, Ichigo just smiled softly, holding them securely in his arms. All the pain and suffering that he endured these last few weeks were absolutely worth it if he could see these two happy and safe. There was no greater reward for him than to see them beaming up at him. He knew that he wasn't the best brother these last few years, and even he could admit to being a moody prick most of the time. But from now on, he would make sure that his sisters received the undivided attention and love they deserved. "I miss the both of you too," he teased gently as he embraced them. Karen snorted in faux annoyance while Yuzu just beamed innocently at him. "When did you get back, Oniai-chan?" she inquired. "Last night. You were both asleep, so I turned in for the night. I was a bit tired after my trip, so it worked out well for me. How about the two of you? What have you girls been up to while I've been away?" he questioned as he led them to the table, their eyes lighting up in joy when they spotted the hot breakfast that he prepared for them. Karen wasted no time digging in while Yuzu was a lot more mindful of her manners. He just chuckled at their contrasting personalities despite being twins. "Karen-chan's been playing soccer around the neighborhood a lot. She even won a few games against the older teams. I've been doing some sewing and knitting. I even made a few new dresses for my dolls, especially Po-staff. But he seems to have disappeared a few days ago. Anyway, we went to the water park to see the dolphins last week. Oh, they were so amazing!" Yuzu gushed as she started narrating the events that took place while he was gone. Ichigo sat there with a gentle smile on his face as he listened to her speak and as he watched Karen eat. It made all the sacrifices worth it if he could experience moments like these. Even though they were busy eating and talking respectively, Karen and Yuzu immediately noticed the change in their big brother. And it wasn't just the physical change. How could they not, for there wasn't anyone else in the world that knew him better than they did. He was a lot less stiff than he used to be and his smile felt so much more natural now. Not to mention, he looked a lot more at peace with himself. They didn't know what happened, but they weren't about to complain about it. It was heartening to see him this carefree. They had sorely missed him these last few weeks. Even Karen, though she would stubbornly deny it. So seeing his gentle smile, one that was reserved solely for them, along with the warmth in his eyes as he looked at them was something that warmed their hearts immensely. They wouldn't question him about his whereabouts, for they knew, even the normally naive Yuzu, that he wasn't being completely truthful with them. They would wait for him to tell them when he is ready to. Until then, they would soak up as much of his attention as they possibly could. The rest of the morning was spent much in the same way, with Ichigo catching up with his sisters who were more than happy to let him know what has been happening in their lives. After a hearty breakfast, which they both thanked him for, Karen volunteered to do the dishes while Yuzu tidied up the house. They told Ichigo to leave it to them after his hard work at fixing them breakfast. He decided to leave them to their devices and made his way to his room. Just as he was about to leave, he stopped and turned around to look at them. "What do you girls have planned for the rest of the day?" he asked. They quizzically looked at each other before Karen shrugged. "Not much. I was just planning on lazing about and watching some TV. I don't have any plans either," Yuzu said. Ichigo nodded before replying. "What do you say we have us a little movie marathon? I can get us some snacks along with ice cream. We can switch on Netflix and spend the rest of the day watching movies. How does that sound?" Their eyes lit up at his suggestion, and they nodded vigorously in acceptance. Ichigo just chuckled at their behavior. "Okay, after you clean up and take care of whatever business you need to. We'll meet back here in about 3 hours. He told them. "Hi, Oniai-chan, you got it, Ichi and I," were their responses. Ichigo nodded before making his way back to his room. After closing his door, he settled into a Jinzen position, immersing himself in his Ryoryoku, and allowing his spirit to be pulled into his inner world. "Welcome back, Ichigo-sama," Mugetsu greeted his as she delicately sipped on her green tea. He found himself in the lounge area of her house within his inner world, sitting in seiza across a small table from her. "Hey Mugetsu. It's good to be back." He warmly greeted his partner. It's been more than a week since they met, and Ichigo is starting to feel a lot more comfortable in her presence. Currently, though, he looked a bit hesitant. Mugetsu noticed his skittish behavior and understood what was troubling him. She would wait for him to address the issue first, though, as she wanted him to be comfortable and open with his trust towards her. "Mugetsu, yesterday, when I was watching over my sisters, there was a moment when I thought about anyone trying to hurt them. The anger I felt was unbelievable. The amount of bloodlust I was feeling was frightening. I didn't even mean to feel that way. The violent thoughts that were going through my mind, it was horrifying. I didn't feel any remorse, though. If anything, I felt vindicated. Why did I feel this way? What is happening to me?" He questioned frantically as he looked at Mugetsu with desperation in his eyes. She looked at him in understanding, for she knew what ailed him. She was expecting this to happen. It wasn't as big of a problem that Ichigo perceived it to be, and she had every intention of helping him through this. But first, he needed to understand and accept those aspects of him that he had denied for so long. "It isn't surprising that this is happening to you. I will explain what is happening to you in a moment, but first I wish for you to answer a question of mine. That inner hollow that you possessed, who we now know as being Zangetsu. What did he represent within you?" she inquired. Ichigo just looked puzzled at her strange question, which seemed to be completely off topic to him, but he answered her nonetheless. "Well, apparently he represented my Shinigami powers, and the hollow is inherited from my mother," he answered unsurely. Mugetsu just shook her head in response. "Those are the powers that he represented within you. I want to know what aspect of you he embodied," she reiterated. Ichigo looked to be struggling with an answer, something that she expected. It was actually the root of one of the many problems he's had over the years. It was something that he needed to deal with if he wanted to move forward. Anger, violence, hatred, wrath, lust, insanity. She listed, to Ichigo's growing horror. He represented everything that you hated about yourself. He was the embodiment of all the negative aspects of your personality that you suppressed over the years. All the parts of yourself that you denied. The two of you were different sides of the same coin. "That's a lie! I'm nothing like him!" Ichigo raged. Mugetsu was unfazed in the face of his anger, though, and simply raised an elegant eyebrow at him. He flushed in embarrassment at the look she was giving him, clearly telling him that he was proving her point. "This is the problem you are facing right now. Your powers are now merging and you are transcending to the next level. Your hollow isn't here anymore to soak up the negative emotions that you bottled up for the last few years, and I refuse to do the same. You are going to need to deal with this differently. You need to understand how unhealthy it is to repress those aspects of your personality. It was the reason for your hollow being so much stronger than you were. You kept feeding him those emotions," she pointed out bluntly. She wanted Ichigo to be the best that he could be. She refused to coddle him like his previous spirit used to. He needed to learn that there is more to strength than swinging around a huge cleaver. He needed to find his inner strength to shoulder the burdens that were sure to appear in his future. You need to accept those aspects of your personality. You need to come to terms with the fact that yes, you do love to fight. You need to understand that it's okay to feel anger or hatred or even lust. Don't bottle those feelings up. Embrace them, for they make you who you are. The key, though, is to learn how to control them and not let them control you. Once you understand that, I will gladly help you temper your emotions. To teach you how to use those aspects of you to fuel your ambition and channel them towards being productive. It's why I emphasized discipline when you suggested taking up martial arts and kendo. Those arts will help you learn self-control along with the control exercises I taught you. For if you keep suppressing them, should something happen to push you over the edge, you could very well end up being the bloodthirsty monster that you envisioned your hollow to be. Ichigo was solemn as she finished speaking. He understood what she was saying. It made a frightening amount of sense to him. It didn't mean he had to like it, though. But he wanted to be better. He didn't want to become like his hollow, or end up like Kenpachi. He had no problems learning to control himself. He would embrace all those parts of him that he denied for so long, for it was naught but a stepping stone on his path. I would be lying if I said I wasn't afraid, but fear never stopped me before. I will take it head on, like I always do. Will you be there with me? He questioned earnestly, the familiar look of resolve appearing in his eyes once again. Always, Ichigo-sama, she replied back happily. They both settled into a comfortable silence, each simply basking in the other's presence. Now that we have some time and I finally have control over my Ryatsu, what is my training menu going to look like? He inquired interestedly. Mugetsu just giggled at his predictably boyish behavior. Now that you have the control, I'm going to teach you all the Kido that I absorbed from Kyoka Sugetsu's memories, both Heido and Bakudo. Those will help in augmenting your skill set, which at the moment is severely lacking. It won't be as hard as you might think though. You already have experience in compressing and firing Ryuryoku from using your Getsuga Tensho. Kido is just shaping that compressed Ryuryoku differently before you release it. We will also work on refining your Shunpa to levels that will hopefully match or surpass your former teacher, she stated. Ichigo was almost vibrating on the spot in anticipation. He's always wanted to learn Kido, but everyone kept telling him that he didn't have the control for it. The thought of flinging fireballs or even using the infamous Kurohitsuji that he experienced firsthand from Aizen was greatly appealing to him. I also plan on teaching you how to harness your hollow abilities. Learning how to fire a Siro, along with the different variations of it, along with how to apply your Hiero, as well as utilizing your instant regeneration abilities. There are many Quincy disciplines that I can teach you as well. Some of them won't really fit someone with your fighting style, but a few of them will bolster your arsenal greatly, like Blood Vene, the signature technique of your mother. Ichigo perked up at hearing that. The thought of learning the same abilities that she had was heartwarming to Ichigo. It was something that he could share with the person that had the greatest impact on his life. He would use those same abilities that she used to protect the family that she so lovingly nurtured. Offensive and defensive abilities aren't the only thing I plan on teaching you. I am going to train your mind as well. I will teach you the intricacies of politics and human psychology, as well as the history of the world of the living, along with Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, as well as the Royal Realm. You will learn how to not only control yourself but your opponents as well. For all his many faults, Aizen Susk was a master manipulator. He could manipulate not just the people around him but also the circumstances as well to suit his agenda. Just because you are a transcended being doesn't mean you're invincible. You will need to learn how to fight smart from now on. Ichigo gulped a little at the passionate speech she just gave. He honestly grimaced at the thought of learning the things that made Aizen so successful in his campaign of madness, but he quickly reminded himself that this was for his family and their future. He would have to suck it up and do what needed to be done. And finally, I will show you the intricacies of my abilities as a Zanpakuto. Now that really caught him off guard. Your abilities? He asked in confusion. The look she gave him at his inquiry caused a shudder of fear to rack his body. Even though there was a pleasant smile of her face, her eyes spoke of untold acts of pain and violence. He made a mental note to never piss off his Zanpakuto, ever. She never took her eyes off him for a second as she continued to stare him down. First off, let me make something very clear to you. I am not Zangetsu. I understand that you had a deep attachment to him, but I am a completely different Zanpakuto. As such, don't think I will let you get away with swinging me around like a mindless brute like you did with him. She punctuated, causing an imaginary arrow with the word brute on it to pierce Ichigo. A small rain cloud appeared above his head at her critique. I expect to be wielded with the skill and finesse of a master swordsman, something I know you are very well capable of. You also need to become more accustomed to wielding a more regular-sized sword, for I am not going to be some huge cleaver. That being said, despite what you may think, I am not a melee-type Zanpakuto. I possess a frightening set of abilities that will be at your disposal. I will train you in the art of wielding me in such a way that would make the abilities of those vaunted captains of Soul Society look like paltry children's tricks. She declared confidently, scoffing at the abilities of the other Zanpakuto in existence. She was the most powerful, and by extension so was her wielder. She was almost hoping that those Soul Society idiots tried something with him just so that she can watch him crush them. Suffice to say, Mugetsu had no love for the Godai 13. Maybe it was the way they used Ichigo along with the fact that she is part hollow as well as part Quincy, but in her eyes, they blew whatever chances they had at getting into her good books from the dismissive way they treated her wielder. Ichigo widened his eyes at the notion of his Zanpakuto having an ability. He just assumed that she would be a melee type like Zangetsu. He didn't think his soul would manifest as something with a special ability, as he was a brute force kind of guy for the most part. But like Mugetsu pointed out, he needed to learn how to fight with skill from now onwards. He actually looked forward to learning all these things from her. Maybe it was a little arrogant of him, but he felt like he deserved this after all his work. He would soak up her lessons like a sponge and become a warrior of frightening proportions. He would try his best to embrace those aspects of him that he feared for so long. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and he was honestly a little afraid, but he wouldn't let fear stop him from moving forward. He wouldn't stop until he reached the top. He would protect all those that he cared for, and there will be nothing that will stand in his way. That was his resolve, and it was unbreakable. He honestly couldn't wait. But for now, he had an evening of fun planned with his sisters, and he had no immediate plans of ever disappointing them.